Welcome to a special episode of the Archetypal Mosaic. This is Mikhail Tank. On the phone is Alan Eichler, the manager of the extraordinarily talented Yma Sumac. Now, Alan, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
You were her manager starting in '84. Tell me how you met her and what was your first impression?
Well, I first met her back in 1984. I was the publicist and booker for a popular club in Hollywood called the Vine Street Bar and Grill. And we were trying to book some special acts for the Olympics. Kind of bigger names than we would normally have. And because everybody thought Los Angeles was going to explode with all the tourism and everybody but the Olympics. So anyway, we were looking for some big names, and we were actually in the meeting of a booking meeting. In the middle of a booking meeting, and the phone rang, and this woman who was a friend of Yma Sumac's asked if we'd be interested in having Yma at the club. I had never met her yet. I had seen her back in 1975 when she played Town Hall in New York, and she autographed my poster after the performance, but I had never dealt with her other than seeing her there. Anyway, this woman called and asked if we were interested in having Yma Sumac, and the boss actually is the one who answered the phone, the owner of the club, and he had no idea who she was. He'd never heard the name before. And he turned to me and he said, "Do we want Yma Sumac?" And I got all excited and I said, yes, we want Yma Sumac. So her terms, I remember this is back in '84, they wanted $2,000 a night guarantee, plus a percentage. And she was just booked for 4 nights, Wednesday through Saturday. And we had no idea. She was still kind of in total obscurity, except for the ardent fans that knew her records. But, the general public really hasn't had any concept of her, in recent years. So we took a chance. We booked her. $2,000 a night at that time was very, very high. And we charged a $20 cover, which at that time was very high, and took a chance. And she did an interview with there was a paper kind of like the Village Voice. It was like the anti-establishment paper called The Reader, and which is no longer publishing. But back then it was like the popular giveaway paper. And they did a huge story, a big cover story. It was actually written, I'm going blank on his name, but the man that created The Simpsons. I can't think of his name, but he created The Simpsons TV show, and I think he writes most of the episodes. He did the interview. He was a big fan of Yma's. He did the interview, and it was like a big cover story.
Matt,
a huge feature.
Matt Groening?
Yes, that's who it was. And that came out, and then then whatever other publicity there was, little blurbs here and there. And opening night, there was a line that literally went around the corner and down the street. And I'd never seen anything like it. And she was doing 2 shows a night, and that continued for the entire engagement. And every show, lines like over a block long. And this show, I wasn't I was just really getting to know her then. She had no real manager or agent other than this woman who had called. The show was kind of like a lounge act. She was because she was mad at Capitol Records, and she was mad at her ex-husband Moises Vivenco, and she didn't want to do any of the Moises Vivenco material because he took credit for all that, and she insisted that she had also helped write the songs and improvised them, and she was angry that he got all the credit for writing, everything on Capitol. So she, intentionally didn't want to sing anything of his. So, and she just had like a lounge, like a trio, conventional trio playing for her. And there was no real stage at the club. It was just on the floor, in front of the tables. And she was short, and people couldn't see her, so we built this like little box that she stood on. And the act was very strange. It was a combination of things that she wrote, and she was making an effort to sing in English because she thought that was showing that she was more educated if she sang in English. So she did these songs in English, and then she would go into her scats and her, the showy stuff, the growls and the bird chirps and all that. And then she would do, when I say terrible, the songs aren't terrible. They were just like old hack stuff that wasn't really Yma Sumac. She was doing things like Try to Remember and Sunrise, Sunset and Midnight in Moscow, which she calls Moscow Nights. And, it was, like I said, it was like a lounge act. The audience didn't care. They were thrilled to see her, and they were screaming. And when she would go into her growls and chirps and all that, they would go crazy.
Now, how did you actually come up to her and say, I'd like to be your manager, I can offer you this?
Well, it was because she did such great business, and I knew people at the ballroom in New York, and I had a good relationship with the owners there, and I contacted them and told them what great business she had done, and that I thought she would be good there. So again, they took a chance, and they booked her. Now, I didn't want her going to New York with the act that she was doing, and I found an arranger that was able to listen to the records and recreate that sound with just 4 or 5 pieces. We couldn't have an orchestra, obviously, but it was, acts were working self-contained at that time. So we had to, she had to pay for the musicians herself out of her salary. So he came up, he was able to cut it down to a keyboard, the piano, who doubled on keyboard.
Is that Cal by any chance? Cal?
No. Cal was a good friend of hers, and she would rehearse with him, but he never played with her for performances. It was the person we used in New York. I can't think of his name. And he did the arrangements, actually. Anyway, he was able to take some of the Capitol things and make new arrangements for them. So we had the piano and keyboard, bass, electric guitar, drums, and we added congas. And the congas, gave her the exotic sound that she needed. And he did wonderful arrangements on Earthquake, High Andes, Malambo, La Molina. 5 or 6 of them. And he made them sound just like the records. And she learned them. She had to actually learn them again because she hadn't been performing them. But she was agreeable to. I had to explain all that to her why we were doing it. And Earthquake was originally written to be sung by her, but we ended up using it as kind of an overture.
Now, let's talk a little bit about the reissues. Now, her extraordinary first album, Voice of the Exotica, is one of the few albums that supposedly has lasted in print in one way or another ever since it was released in 1950.
It's been in every form. Yes, it's never gone out of print, and it's been. You can trace the history of recordings with that album because it came out on 78s. It's been on 45s, cassettes, 8-track cartridges, LP, enhanced for stereo LP, and then CD finally. And now you can download it. So it's actually like a history of recordings.
And that is a very rare feat, correct?
Yes, there could be other albums that you could do that with. Maybe some of the big show albums, maybe like South Pacific or whatever. But for a solo artist, I think it's unique.
Now, do you remember?
It's always had the same cover. I mean, it's always been in its original form, the same artwork.
Yeah, the artwork is spectacular. The myth behind
the same liner notes, those same incredible liner notes.
Let's talk about the reissue back in '96. Right Stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Did you contact them? Did they contact you? How did that whole reissue thing go? Because
they contacted me actually, mm-hmm. and Right Stuff was a branch of Capitol that was trying to do more avant-garde releases, and it was right at the height of the Exotica and lounge explosion with Martin Denny and all that kind of material and lounge, and he got the idea to put out all of the Yma Sumac, and we did.
Now, tell me a little bit about, around 1990 when Mariah Carey came out and she had a tremendous range. I remember as a child looking through a magazine where there was a comparison between Mariah and Yma. There was both of their photos next to each other. I'm wondering, do you think the fact that Mariah became famous in the early 90s, did that bring Yma Sumac's name back to a lot of people and make Capitol go, let's reissue them?
I don't know if Mariah Carey's name never really came up that much in terms of Yma. Mm-hmm. Nina Hagen did, and a few others. But to backtrack a little bit, when she did go to the ballroom mm-hmm. in 87, it was, or 86, it might have been. She had this enormous success. We had no idea. Hollywood had been great, but then she went to the ballroom. And they created this incredible set, which they didn't normally do. They had a real stage. They put Inca gods on each side of the stage that looked like the Exotica gods. They were just styrofoam, but from the audience they looked like they were stone. And they had beautiful color backdrops. And we had the Exotic group, the musicians that I mentioned, and they played Earthquake, which with the electric guitar and the electric keyboard, and it sounded incredible with the rumble sounds and everything. And then she entered and went into High Andes, and the audience. It was an incredible show, and the engagement was incredible. Michael Musto was still writing for the Village Voice then, and he reviewed the opening night and called it the night of 100 drag queens. But it was all kinds of people in the audience. But anyway, it was an incredible success, and she sold out 2 shows a night for the entire run, which was 3 weeks. 3 weeks. And it was covered by everybody, Vogue, Time Magazine, all the TV news shows. The Washington Post came up and interviewed her and did 2 full pages in the Washington Post, and she wasn't playing in Washington. It was just incredible, and they extended the run for an additional 2 weeks. They had other acts booked, and what they did was book Yma around the other acts at different time slots, and they all sold out. And she was there long enough that the Vogue issue actually came out while she was still there. And People Magazine, we also had People Magazine, 2 full pages, and that's when she did the David Letterman show. It was an incredible engagement, and then she went back and did a second run there, and that's when she was getting other bookings, San Francisco and Boston and Chicago, and they were all incredible. And then in 89 or 90, we went to Berlin, which was another big success, and Brussels, and then Paris, and she did the Matter TV show, which is on YouTube. And that was with John McDaniel on piano. And they had some big smoke effects, and she did High Andes and La Molina. And it was just a triumph. And then we recorded a German, two guys that had a small German label wanted to do a dance record with her. And we were back in Hollywood. We had come back home. And they flew to Los Angeles and put her into a little... They built the track for a song that they created called Mambo Confusion.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's a fun one. I love that. I love that singer.
Yeah, and they built the track, and they flew to Hollywood. She went into a little studio in Hollywood and recorded it. And then they went back to Berlin, and it was actually just before we went to Berlin. Then we went to Berlin, and they played it for us. And I said to them, it needs a climax, just something, a high note or something that'll just give it that extra punch. So they booked a studio in Berlin. She had already recorded the song. They booked a studio in Berlin, and she went into the studio and just did the high note, the one high note. And they added it to the track, which is, the strangest recording session I ever went to for one note, but it worked.
She sings Akuchibao, Chip Chip Chibao. What does that mean? Where does that come from? Is that just improvising, or does that come from a meaning?
Well, she always said that she was singing in Quechuan, but I don't know the difference.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So it's not Spanish,
mm-hmm.
but she would say it was Quechuan, but it could just be some form of scat that she did.
Now, let me ask you a few questions about some of the work and some of the myths. In the Jivaro album, Legend of the Jivaro, which are the headhunters in the high Andes,
right.
It says in the linear notes that she and her ex-husband, who helped her in the beginning very much, they went to the headhunters and they learned things.
Studied their music. No, you can't believe any of those liner notes.
So that was a story created. But that definitely didn't happen, or do you think it's possible that it happened?
No, that didn't. No, I'm sure it didn't happen.
Okay, you guys ever talk about that?
Well, she would laugh about it. I can tell you that we went to. What I can tell you was true is that in 2006 we went to Lima, and she was honored. She received the Presidential Medal of Freedom, which a gold medal, which is their highest honor. We went to the palace, and she got this big medal. And then once people knew she was really there, she started getting awards and from all kinds of other people. And we even went to Machu Picchu, and some of this is on YouTube. And she went up, she walked up Machu Picchu and sang at the top the Temple of the Sun up in Machu Picchu, because she sung there in the 50s and they wanted to film her back up there. So she went up there and sang a cappella up there. And anyway, I met her three sisters were still living. Mm-hmm. So what I can tell you is true is that she was from a little town in Peru. Mm-hmm. Imperative. She has this very long name. You can probably find it on Wikipedia. A very long name, several names.
Yeah, Zoila, Augusta, Emperatriz, Chivari.
Imperative is her first name, and then a bunch of other names. And she really was born in Peru. And she told me that her grandmother had Inca blood, and that's where she got the Inca princess from, because she said if anybody had Inca blood, they were royal. So, I don't know. But anyway, I met her three sisters.
Let's hang on with that one comment, because I'm really interested in that. Because it says, in history, it says here that through her mother's side, so her father was partially Spanish, and her mother was full-blooded whatever the correct name from that location, Quechua. So, is it true that the mother was related to the last emperor? And that she indeed, because she was the youngest of six, that she indeed carried the royal blood?
Yeah, if you wanted to. I mean, you could probably trace all of that. That's what she claimed, and she did say that her grandmother, was Incan or had Inca blood, and
okay.
So much of her is myth, but what's true is that she is from a little town in Peru.
Mm-hmm.
She did have Inca ancestors,
Mm-hmm.
and she is self-taught in terms of her music. When she says she learned, to sing from the birds, studied. She never had a coach or a vocal coach or anything. So everything she did was self-taught, and she did have an amazing voice. I mean, her voice, that wasn't a trick. She actually could sing, the way the records sound. She always told me she would never lose her voice, and she actually didn't. I mean, those last performances in the 90s, I mean, she didn't sound like she did in the 50s, but she still was extraordinary.
Now
and she would do things.
That double trill that she could do, what she did in Chuncho,
right.
Is that completely one of a kind? I mean, is there anybody else who can pretty much do that?
I think it was a triple trill at some time. She could do it in. She could. Well, she could do it back then, and then she could do it when she was in Flahuli. Barbara Cook made her Broadway debut in Flahuli, and she said that she used to follow Yma. In the next, she had to make an entrance after Yma, so she would stand in the wings every night and listen to her. And Barbara Cook said in interviews that she had never heard anything like it. That when she would hear the trills, Yma said that she had no control of it. In other words, she couldn't just do it on command. It was something that happened on certain nights that just kind of happened, and she never knew when it was going to happen. But
and the amazing thing about those trills is it sounds like there's 2 or 3 people singing at the same time. How does that
exactly.
even...
It's just the way she controlled her voice, her throat.
Mm-hmm.
She had a very big chest capacity,
mm-hmm.
and she had taught, when I say taught, or trained her voice to do the growls and the high voices, and it was a control. I mean, it was a way she controlled her throat, but like I said, she couldn't just. Mm-hmm. She couldn't do it all the time. Mm-hmm. Is what she meant, and when it happened, but she would try for it all the time, but she never knew when it was going to happen.
Now, was there a lot of material that you would consider unreleased, studio material back in the Capitol days or around that time?
I'm sure there was. Some of it came out in the reissues as bonus tracks.
But
and
have you ever talked to them about maybe doing an unreleased album?
Yeah, Tom Cartwright is the person at Right Stuff who put the reissues out. They don't have the Right Stuff label anymore, but Tom is still a big fan of Yma's. Mm-hmm. It is a good idea. Plus, they own those early Argentinian recordings that came out in South America before she came to America. And they've been out in Europe and in South America, but they've never actually been officially released in the United States. Some of them are on an early Coral LP.
Yeah, the yellow looking
Capitol
one.
Actually, they were just licensed. Capitol actually, EMI, well, not Capitol, but EMI, which is the parent company of Capitol, owns those, and they could come out. And then there is more unreleased material, some of which are on the reissues.
And another concept, maybe there could be a brand new remix album with the Extabay album and the Chuncho, because I think if it was done for clubs and for the new age, it could be an exquisite new thing.
Yes, they could add extra tracks to it.
Now let's talk.
Record over it and add more musicians or more sounds.
Let's talk a little bit about her voice. Now, at some points it said 4 octaves. At some points it said 5 octaves.
She always said 5. Mm-hmm. I know some people say 4. She always claimed she had 5.
And when...
And I can't tell.
Compared to, like, opera singers or, let's say, Mariah's voice, Has there ever been, do people compare them, or do they just say Yma Sumac's voice has the largest?
Nick Lemansky in his book,
Mm-hmm.
Which is a very, very wonderful book. I recommend it very highly. He actually has a chart that he drew that proves that she had 5 octaves, and he explains it all, and he compares her to various opera singers. And there's a graphic chart in the book that proves that the 5 octaves.
Okay, and now in the 70s, she did a rock album, Miracles, which was later called Yma Rocks. Can you talk about that phase of her life, and how did she enjoy that?
It was called Miracles, and Les Baxter produced it and wrote it. And she got angry because, again, she insisted that she had improvised, and she wanted credit for helping write the songs. So the album came out, and it just had Lex Baxter as the writer, and she was furious. And it started to hit the Billboard chart, and she actually had it taken off the market. She was very self-destructive that way. Anyway, she had it taken off. I didn't know her back then, but she had to take it off the market, and it disappeared. And it was on London Records. And the CD reissue, Yma Rocks, was done by the guy in San Francisco who's got her website up there. And it's not an official release. He just bootlegged it. And that has 2 missing tracks that he found that he had. But it wasn't officially done. London Records now is owned by Universal. So they could put it out if they wanted to, but they haven't so far. I've never actually contacted them.
I have both versions. I have the original Miracles and the Yma Rocks. I love both versions of the record. They sound great. It's interesting, you bring up, and Yma brought up, a very important topic about songwriting, which is when there is no words, particularly, shouldn't it be part of the songwriting? And it really should. She had a very important point, which I guess the performance rights organizations may not have been fully aware of, because usually songs are music and lyrics, but in her case
I know.
it was...
She did the same thing with Mambo Confusion. She got angry with them because they wouldn't put her name. She wanted to have half of the writing credit.
Makes sense.
And it became a big battle, and they didn't give it to her, and she had that withdrawn. That's why it was only issued in Germany.
That's why
it was supposed to come out around the world and in the United States, but it never did.
That would be a great kind of contract thing to start out with, at a meeting. Go, she's getting half the credit.
She asked for it, and they kind of, they never really were clear if they were going to give it to her or not.
I see.
But when it came out and it just had their names, she was very upset, very angry.
It makes perfect sense.
And it was put out by a German label, but she stopped it from going out anywhere else. You can still find it on Amazon or eBay. But the other recording that she did that I should talk about a little bit is Stay Awake, which was Hal Wilner's A&M album of mostly rock singers doing Walt Disney songs. And he contacted me and asked if Yma would do something. So she did I Wonder from Sleeping Beauty. And we went to the recording session, and it was a 60-piece symphony orchestra. I'd never been to a session like that with such a big orchestra. And Ringo Starr and I'm going blank on I might go blank on names now. Harry Nilsson. I'm sorry. Harry Nilsson and Ringo Starr were recording at the same session. They each were doing one song. The Beatles had been fighting with Capitol, which had been in the papers. It was a big lawsuit that the Beatles had against Capitol. And so at the recording session, Yma knew about that. And there was one point at the session where she was sitting with Ringo, and they were comparing each other's problems with Capitol Records, which I thought was very funny. And Harry Nilsson brought his little boy over to Yma and introduced her and said to his little boy, "This is the greatest singer in the world." And so it was interesting. And they did their songs, and it was Yma's turn, and she refused to sing with the symphony. She wanted, she said, to have them record, and then she would come in later and do her voice. So there was a fight about that, but they finally agreed, and they recorded the orchestra. And then she went in like a day or two later and perfectly did her voice over it. And then we were supposed to do one final recording, which upset me because Pink Martini were big fans. And they wanted Yma to do a track for one of their albums. And Thomas Lauderdale came down. They live in Portland. He came down, and I let them work together. They worked together all day on the song. And she loved him, and she loved the idea, and it was a song that she created, so she knew it. She also could have just improvised whatever she wanted. And they set a recording date for a few weeks later, and he booked a studio, and he came down for the session, and she refused to leave her apartment. This was like really at the end, and she refused to leave her apartment. And she was very stubborn. It was very hard to get her to ever change her mind about something. She refused to leave. She would not just record, but she wouldn't go out. She wouldn't leave the apartment. And we had to call him. He was actually at the studio waiting. We had to call him and tell him. And so she never did it. But that would have been such a nice final cap on her career, to do something like that. And she was capable of it.
Now, it makes sense that, they asked to do the orchestra first because they're saving a lot of money if they do the orchestra one time and then she records later. Instead of, if she was in the studio with them, she could have said, do it again and again.
It could have worked either way, but it did work out finally, and and it's a nice track, and it's on the album.
Now, let's... go ahead. Yes.
And then she did Follies. She did Follies in '91, Stephen Sondheim's Follies, and she was wonderful. I booked her. They contacted me to see if she would be willing to do it, and it wasn't really an audition, but they wanted to, I guess, make sure she could sing. And I took her to a rehearsal studio, and she agreed to go, and she sang for them, but they already wanted her. They just wanted to make sure she could do it. And so she played Heidi, the older opera singer, and was wonderful. And not just with the song, but little bits of dialogue here and there. And stayed in character and did the engagement. It was like 3 weeks, and starred Julia Prowse and Dorothy Lamour and Denise Darcel. So like an all-star cast. But I'd never seen her do a book musical. I think she'd never done one except for Flahooley. And this was 40 years later. And she was wonderful in it.
Now, the book you mentioned is called Yma Sumac, The Art Behind the Legend by Nicholas Limansky. It's available on Amazon. And also there's 2 excellent websites about Yma Sumac by different gentlemen who have her websites. Now, let's talk a little bit about some other things. For example, in 2008... I was a Grammy voting member, and I contacted them and I said, she really needs a Lifetime Achievement Award. And they said, possibly, let's think about it. And nothing materialized. I'm still really, really feeling that she should get a Grammy Award, even though she's not.
Oh, I agree.
Playing. Maybe we can do something about that, because I really feel strongly about it. Now, back when she first came out, some people considered her a novelty, but when she went to Russia, because my relatives, I remember them telling me, of course I wasn't around back then, but they told me much later that they saw her on TV and on the radio, and it was amazing. It was extraordinary. And they released vinyls of her, Russian vinyls, which are really hard to find. And I just want to ask you, how extraordinary was that for her to be taken not only seriously, but with extreme veneration?
Very important, because she had divorced Moises by then. But they reunited for the Russian tour. And she said, I don't have an itinerary, but she says that she toured the Soviet countries for about 2 years. And I can't imagine she was there actually 2 full years, but maybe, on and off. But she was there a very long time, and she was very well received. I mean, received as an artist, a true artist. And you're right, in this country back in the 50s, I think she was more of a novelty. She sold, I mean, it was a bestseller, but I don't think people considered it as true artistry. And, well, up until the end, I mean, she was a cult figure, but I don't know. Certain music people that understand, and Nick Lemansky is one of them because he knows opera and classical music. Some classical music fans and opera fans, they actually appreciate what she does, I mean, on a musical level. But the average audience just thinks of it as a gimmick or a trick. And even as late as her club appearances, there were times that there would be people laughing, and she took herself very seriously. Mm-hmm. And the flamboyance with the costumes and all of that was her idea of show business. So she it was kind of a Liberace thing. She, that was her sense of performing, was the erupting volcanoes and all of that.
Very tastefully.
Singing, she took very seriously.
It's a perfect combination, I have to say. And her costumes and her look, it was dramatic, but it was very tasteful. It didn't go overboard. Like, in my opinion, Liberace went way overboard. But
yeah, of course, yes. But I mean the sense of the tiaras and
And who made those costumes for her? Those extraordinarily imperial costumes.
Different people, that she knew. She never, she knew a lot of the people that made her costumes and the hats. And she had a very good fashion sense, even in her personal wardrobe, when she went out. She was two people, as her everyday self. I worked with her as a kid who was similar that way, and even Carol Channing. Their stage personas were much different than their private personas. They became that character. What you saw on stage was basically a character that they played, and not that it wasn't real, but it was a stage character, a stage persona. Eartha Kitt in real life, who I worked with for a long time, was Eartha May. She was just very plain and didn't wear makeup and loved to garden and so on. Carol Channing even was that way, without her wigs and everything. She was just a simple person. Yma was that way. She wore a lot of very bright lipstick. She always had her lipstick, but she didn't do her eyes, and she didn't, do a lot of makeup when she just would go out to the market, and she was too cheap to tailor her pants. She would take scissors, and if pants were too long for her, she'd take scissors and cut them where she wanted them to be, and wore straw hats. And she was just a totally different person. And when I first started working with her, she kind of trained me. She told me that when she was being Yma Sumac, I must call her Miss Sumac, and I should, on the first day of rehearsal of each group of musicians, I should introduce her to the musicians, present her to the musicians. And it was she would be very formal. And in private life, we would just giggle and, have fun. She could be very funny.
Now,
the accent was real.
The accent. Now, what about her family, her late husband and her son? Did you get a chance to meet either of them?
No, I never. They were in Spain, and it's interesting that I went to Europe with Yma, I think, 3 times, and her son was in Madrid with Moises, with the husband. She never made any attempt to contact him or try to see him or call him. All the years that I worked with her, from '84 up until she died, they never saw each other.
Wow.
She claimed that they talked on the phone every week, but I don't quite believe it. And she said she got letters from him all the time. I don't believe that either.
Did she ever tell you how much she missed her son, how much she loved her son?
Yeah, but she would also say that they talked every week.
Mm-hmm.
And how much she loved her and how much she loved him. Then she'd say he's in college. When people would ask about her son, she'd say he was in college. But in the 80s and 90s, she was still saying he was in college.
I see.
And so it was all like fantasy. And like I said, neither of them ever made any attempt to see each other. Some people now think that she raised him, but some people think that Moises was having Moises was very promiscuous.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a big scandal when he was having an affair with one of Yma's dancers. And so some people think that the baby was actually the dancer's baby with Moises' father. Mm-hmm. And that because they didn't want a scandal, Yma said it was her baby and she raised him. But I don't know. I could never verify that with her. Mm. She always insisted he was her son.
Interesting. Now, what about Peru? Are they thinking of maybe doing a museum or an exhibition with Yma's amazing costumes and?
Yes, they should. And unfortunately, when she passed away, the person that has one of the websites got everything that was in storage. Mm-hmm. And had her buried in Hollywood. The family wanted her buried in Lima. And they should have actually gotten her things, her costumes, but she saved everything. She never threw anything out. But the son was the natural heir, and he didn't care about any of it, and he didn't want any of the things in storage. He only wanted whatever money there was. So he gets her royalties, and everything that was in storage went to this person that has one of the websites. And he's been selling off some of it on eBay. And it should have really all gone to the family in Peru. They didn't get anything. They weren't even invited to the funeral. And they were treated very badly.
So you're saying that the son of Yma actually gets the royalties, even though he doesn't know?
He's the natural heir because he's her legal son.
Wow.
Whether she gave birth to him or not, he's considered her son, and he inherited her estate. Mm. But he didn't want any of the things in storage. Instead of letting them go to the family, everything went to the website person.
Now, if we were talking about Amy Camus, the ridiculous rumor.
That was a joke. There was a columnist back in the 50s named Lee Mortimer, who is kind of a Walter Winchell type gossip columnist. Mm. He wrote for the Daily Mirror, which was a New York paper that was competing with the Daily News at that time. And it was in the 50s when Yma was getting so much publicity, and the Exotica album had been such a huge success, and the Improbable liner notes, and she was having big success in New York and clubs. So he wrote that in his column as a joke, and it just caught on, and people still say it today.
How did she feel about it?
She was angry about it at first, then she would laugh about it, but it's not true.
But, for the people who use it out of misunderstanding or jealousy or whatever, and they think that it is true, it's a complete fabrication. And do you think that it kind of maybe ruined something in her career, this fabrication?
Well, it did and it didn't, because it caught on so much that it made everybody talking or laughing. Maybe it made her a little bit more of a joke, like you said, a novelty. But her early New York appearances, mm-hmm. well, her early South American appearances, and then when she first came to New York, the original spelling of her name was Imma Sumac. Mm-hmm. It was Yma Sumac and the Exotica trio. Mm-hmm. That's how they were billed, and that's when she first came to New York and played clubs and various places. That's where Capitol signed her. She was at the Blue Angel, which was a popular cabaret room back then, and she always has a black man they had multiple bills. Nightclubs back then had 2 or 3 acts, on a bill that would play each night, and it wasn't like today where you go and see one person. There would be like 3 or 4, and that would rotate. They'd rotate through the evening, and she could never remember his name. I'm guessing it was Josh White, probably. So I was trying to think of who would have played the Blue Angel back then. I think it's before Harry Belafonte's time. My guess is it was probably Josh White, but I'm just trying to guess. She only remembers it was a black singer. Anyway, Capitol Records had come to see him about possibly signing him. It could have been Harry, because Harry Belafonte did some very early recordings for Capitol before he was on RCA. So it might have been Belafonte, but it was somebody like that who was still kind of unknown. And Capitol came to see whoever that was, and Yma happened to be on the bill, and they signed her, and they thought they would take a chance on her, and there was nobody recording that was anything like her at that time. And they just knew what to do with her. Les Baxter and Moises, they created those sounds on the X-Ray album that are extraordinary. Yeah. They kind of commercialized what she did.
Yeah, I remember her, some interviews with her talking about how important it was to take the value and the beauty of the culture and then to add the flair of the American music at that time to combine to this incredible thing. Now, Capitol Records, there were some possible issues, and I think you mentioned that everything was resolved in terms of the royalties, right? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, it just, back then royalties were very small. Artist royalties were maybe 2 or 3%. And all of the costs of recording came out of that 2 or 3%. So that's why a lot of people were what they called in the red, because the recordings, didn't recoup the cost. Yma sold very well, so she was in the black. Now, I don't know about the later albums, but I think they all pretty much recouped. But she was just getting that very small royalty. But then in the Ruth Brown, who was another client of mine, started the Rhythm and Blues Foundation, and they fought Capitol and Atlantic and Warner Brothers over those small royalties and the debts that a lot of singers still had. Like Ruth Brown owed Atlantic $20,000 at that point. Anyway, they renegotiated everything, and the labels didn't have to do it. I mean, it was just something they voluntarily did. And they did what they called a legendary artist contract, which they selected who they would give it to, which wiped out everybody's debt if they had any, and raised everybody's royalty to 10%, which was the standard at that time. And so Yma was getting, fairly substantial royalties. When I was working with her towards the end of her life, even she bought a condo for about $250,000, and she paid cash for it. And she had about another $250,000 in the bank, and she did everything in cash. She didn't write checks or anything. I would have to take her to the post office, and she would get money orders. That's how she paid her bills. And so she had cash, and she wasn't a millionaire, but for somebody in their 80s, to have $250,000 cash in the bank and own her condo, that was pretty good. And
tell me,
her last years were sad. I had lost track of her. She was in the condo, and she moved out to the condo from her apartment in Hollywood. And she got the only way I could piece it together. Well, I had a falling out with her. She would be terrible at times, and I took so much from her. But when she got abusive, I had to walk away. But I always came back. Anyway, she was living out in the condo, and she got into a big fight with one of the neighbors, and the police came, and she was fighting with the police, and they arrested her, and she ended up in a mental ward, where they put prisoners or whatever, and which is horrible. And I won't go into it. It's a long story.
Mm-hmm.
But I finally traced where she ended up living in a nursing home out near Pasadena that was for Alzheimer's patients. And I found out she was there, and I went there, and she was in her room, and she was fine. She opened the door of her room, and she was Yma. She was fine. The other people living there were like zombies. They were Alzheimer's people waiting to die. They were just out of their, they couldn't talk or walk or do anything. They just sat with their mouths open, But they put her there just to put her somewhere where nobody would know where she was. Anyway, I moved her to an assisted living building in Hollywood where my mother was living, which was apartments, and people that were normal just needed health problems, needed help, got their meals or whatever. But they were all individual apartments, not rooms. And I got her a nice apartment with a separate bedroom and living room and kitchen. And that's where she was living until she got the cancer. She was diagnosed. She wouldn't go to the doctor. She was in terrible pain, and she kept complaining about the pain, but she wouldn't go to the doctor. And when she finally went, it was too late. She had colon cancer, and it had spread too much by then. So that's what she died from. But I'm getting off track, I guess.
That's okay.
But,
let me ask you a few quick... I know we're about to wrap up the interview, but I still have a few questions for you. You mentioned she was abusive. Do you mean like just vocally, like saying bad words kind of thing?
One time she threw a glass of water in my face. She would yell. She would just lose her temper and scream and get kind of crazy. She was very eccentric. Now I'm talking about Yma herself, as not the stage person.
Right.
She on stage too, she would yell at the musicians and walk off, and we did a concert in Berlin that was sold out. She was supposed to do 2 concerts in a row, 2 Monday nights on the Folly set in Berlin, and where Eartha was doing Follies in German with a German cast, and so she was booked for the 2 Monday nights because they didn't perform Follies on those nights, and they were both sold out in a large theater, very large theater. Both nights were sold out, and the first night she came out on stage, and it was like Marlene Dietrich coming back to Berlin. I mean, the audience, it was her first time performing in Europe in 35 years. The audience went absolutely crazy. They were screaming and cheering at everything she did. And by the end of the concert, they were booing her because of her behavior, the way she was yelling at the musicians and walking off and coming back, and her behavior. And when at the end of the concert, the promoter, the owners of the theater, said they were going to cancel the second week, even though it was sold out, because they didn't want her back in their theater. And so that's the kind of thing she would do. And
now let me ask you these questions. Did you ever go with her to Asia, to Japan, to perform?
No.
Mm-hmm. But she did perform in Japan at some point, I read, right?
It would have been, but not in her later years, probably in the 50s or 60s.
Now,
or 70s.
Would she be considered the co-creator of Exotica?
Yeah, I mean, that term didn't exist then. It was, it's actually a term that was created later. But, yes, there wasn't anybody like her before her.
So it was her and Lex Baxter, in a way, who created the term Exotica unintentionally, pretty much, right? Possibly?
Yeah.
Now, do you have a favorite track of hers that you personally adore?
Oh, I like so many. I like Malambo, Chuncho,
Is it?
Ayatura. She loved Chuncho. I think that was her favorite.
Oh, that's funny. It's my favorite, too.
And she would say to me, when you've got a headache, she would talk, when you've got a headache, you should lie down and turn all the lights off and play Chuncho.
It's funny, I do that. I've done that since I was a kid. That's amazing. I didn't know that. I love it. I heard that Chuncho and some other tracks, they sound great in different speeds. So you can, on the vinyl, of course you can't do that with a CD, but on a vinyl, it gives you a completely different atmosphere. Have you tried that or heard people do that?
No.
Okay.
But I can understand what you mean.
Now, there's 3 more questions I have as we wrap up.
Uh-huh.
The first one is magic talismans. Of course, she had a lot of the gorgeous sun god type of jewelry and stuff. Do you know of any particular talisman that gave her strength or power? Maybe a ring or a jewel or anything she wore or held?
No, I don't think she believes in any of that.
Okay, the next question.
Even if she said it, but it wasn't anything she actually believed in.
Now, do you miss her?
Yes, very much.
If you could,
we had wonderful time. She could be very difficult, but we had wonderful times together as well. Getting back to the eccentricities, I mean, she wouldn't talk business on the telephone, and I would have to drive over to her apartment. So even if I needed to ask her, like, just a question or something, I had to drive to the apartment to talk to her privately. And she wouldn't talk in her apartment because she thought the manager was listening in on her conversations. So I would drive over to the apartment, and she would come out and sit in my car, and we would talk business in my car. Things like that. And but I put up with that. And then, like I said, I had a lot of patience with her, except when she was abusive. By abusive, I mean like screaming at me.
Mm-hmm. Temperamental, let's put it that way, right?
Yeah. My partner back then had just passed away, and
it was difficult.
Late. I was supposed to come and talk to her about something, and I was late, so I'd been dealing with that. And I tried explaining that to her, and she still was like yelling at me because I was late. I mean, she could be very insensitive at times, but that last trip that we did to Peru, I mean, we had a wonderful time.
Now,
she was.
Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. Tell me about the trip.
She was very cooperative. She did everything that she was asked to do, and all of the appearances. And Machu Picchu was not actually on the schedule. She was being interviewed by a TV crew in Lima. And I casually mentioned how I would love to go to Machu Picchu. That had always been a fantasy of mine, to go to Machu Picchu with Yma Sumac. Mm-hmm. And I didn't think remotely it was ever possible. But it used to be like a fantasy. And anyways, I mentioned to the woman how I'd love to see Machu Picchu. And it was like a 60 Minutes type show in Peru. And she went to the phone and she called somebody she knew at the Orient Express, and she got the trip for us. And she said, as long as they could film it, everything would be free.
Did they film it?
So, yeah. So she arranged the whole thing. In the Orient Express, we had first class tickets, which cost over $1,000 normally if you were to buy it. And we had to fly to Cusco, and then we were in Cusco for 4 or 5 days, acclimating to the height. And then we took the Orient Express first class to Machu Picchu. And that's when she went up to the Temple of the Sun and sang.
Now, was this concert available in video form anywhere? Because I haven't seen this one.
It's not a full concert. She just did like 1 or 2 songs up on the top of the rocks. And part of that is on YouTube. If you look up Yma Sumac, Peru, a lot of that stuff comes up. Tell me,
did the president give her the Award of the Sun, or was it somebody else?
No, actually, as it turned out, there was like an election going on. He was very busy doing something in another part of the country. So it was at the presidential palace, and it was a big ceremony, but it was the vice president who actually presented the award. Then we went to the mayor's office, which was also a huge palace-type structure, and she got the award from the mayor of Lima, and then the university gave her a big award. And then there was a big ceremony at one of the opera houses where we sat in this box, and these dancers came out and danced to her music, and then she was brought on stage at the end. It was an incredible time. And her, like I said, 3 of her sisters were still living, and her nephews, and so it was all wonderful, and the family was excited. And she hadn't seen her sisters in 19 years.
How did she celebrate her birthdays, which are in September? Did you celebrate her birthdays?
She didn't really. Maybe I took her out to dinner or something, but she wasn't that kind of a person.
Okay. And, go ahead.
Well, she wasn't, like I said, in private life, she was very private and very, the total opposite of her stage, presence, except when she lost her temper, which, she still could do periodically. And,
do you think The Right Stuff did a great job with the reissues?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
And also the one I did for Capital, I forget what they called it, kind of the best of Yma Sumac, but I forget the title. You probably know the one I mean. I think it came out first, but it has a very extensive booklet.
Is it The Spell of Yma Sumac? No?
It's on Capital proper.
Okay.
On Capital, and it's kind of like the best of Yma Sumac, and I include some of the outtakes. And I took, tracks from each of the albums.
Oh, you mean the sampler?
Well, it's not a sampler, but it's a full CD.
The ultimate, Exotic, the best of?
The ultimate, yes, the ultimate Yma Sumac. And I wrote the liner notes for that.
Oh, wonderful.
The ultimate Yma Sumac. That's a very good compilation.
Excellent.
And a beautiful booklet.
Wonderful. Well, Alan, it's been a true pleasure speaking with you about the extraordinary Yma Sumac. So thank you for being on the Archetypal Mosaic.
Get her that Grammy.
I know. Let's talk about that right after I finish recording. Thank you so much, Alan. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you.